Okay, I want you to imagine a train so incredibly massive that it completely dwarfs absolutely anything running on the tracks today. We're jumping straight into one of the most bizarre, impossible, and frankly terrifying engineering projects ever conceived. It was called the Breitspurbahn.
So what if a train was actually as big as a building? Seriously, picture a locomotive rolling through the countryside that looks way less like a vehicle and a lot more like a multi-story apartment complex on wheels. I know, it sounds exactly like science fiction, right? But this wasn't some crazy movie script. This was a very real obsession, an unbelievable luxury megatrain that was the personal pet project of Adolf Hitler. Let's explore the sheer physical absurdity of this thing before we uncover its incredibly dark origins.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really wrap our heads around the jaw-dropping scale of this project, you just have to look at the track gauge. Now, standard tracks are 1,435 millimeters. That's the width of the railways you and I ride on today, pretty much everywhere in the world. But the proposed Breitspurbahn tracks? A staggering 3,000 millimeters wide. That is more than double the standard width. It literally required entirely new, impossibly massive infrastructure just to hold the thing up.
And the sheer madness of the timeline here is just staggering. 84,000 tons. That is the amount of steel granted exclusively to this project in the year 1941. I mean, think about that context for a second. Germany is right in the middle of a brutal, resource-draining world war. Steel is incredibly scarce, right? It's desperately needed for actual military equipment. Yet, Hitler personally demanded that top priority and all necessary forces be deployed for his megalomaniacal toy, pulling 84,000 tons of critical resources completely away from reality.
So what exactly was the Breitspurbahn? Well, basically, it was a proposed broad-gauge railway system, but the dimensions are what make it a total monster. We're talking about double-decker passenger trains up to 420 meters long and freight trains stretching over a full kilometer. The train cars themselves would be 6 meters wide and 7 meters high. Honestly, today's modern high-speed trains would look totally puny next to them. And what's really wild is that despite actively fighting a losing war, German industry actually submitted over 100 different designs for these locomotives and wagons.
Now, if you thought the outside was massive, let's move inside, because this just keeps building. The planned amenities literally read like a modern luxury cruise ship. A 200-seat cinema, 4 bathtubs, and 20 showers so wealthy travelers could freshen up in transit. It even featured fully equipped ladies and gentlemen's hairdressing salons, because, you know, the regime's elite couldn't possibly let their undercuts suffer during a long journey. Add in pastry shops, fully stocked bars, and oh, let's definitely not forget the hidden anti-aircraft dome strapped to the roof. It was this bizarre mix of extreme leisure and heavy militarization.
The lavishness of the first class was specifically designed to lull passengers into absolute awe. Take the dining car, for instance. Unlike the rest of the massive double-decker train, this dining car was planned to be just a single-decker. Why? Well, so the ceilings could be exceptionally high, giving you the illusion that you weren't even on a train at all. It was going to be paneled with natural wood, dripping with gold adornments, and lit by these grand hanging chandeliers. Just total, jaw-dropping extravagance.
But here comes the narrative whiplash, exposing a stark and truly horrifying contrast. On the top deck of the train, you've got around 200 elite passengers enjoying spacious sofas, roaming the pastry shops, and soaking in bathtubs. But on the exact same train, hidden away below, you had the Eastern worker carriages. Down there, instead of opulent space for 200, they crammed 480 enslaved laborers into bare, completely wooden compartments.
The daily reality for these enslaved workers was incredibly brutal. There were no plush seats for them, obviously. Only harsh, wooden benches built for 8 travelers per compartment. By day, they sat on this hardwood. By night, they slept on the exact same wood. They were completely physically blocked off from the rest of the train's luxurious communal areas. Their food wasn't served under chandeliers, right? It was cooked in a large kitchen, pushed through the worker carriages and metal buckets, and doled out. It was extreme luxury built literally adjacent to horrific suffering.
Which brings us to a massive, glaring question that we absolutely have to ask. Why? Why prioritize this monster train while actively losing a world war? Let's zoom out from the micro details of the chandeliers and wooden benches to the macro perspective here. What was the grand geopolitical strategy driving this madness? What was the ultimate point of a building on rails?
Well, the answer lies directly in the dictator's own words. During a lunch meeting in Munich back in March 1942, Hitler stated, "We need a fast connection between Upper Silesia and the Donetsk Basin to develop the eastern region, especially economically, in line with our plans." He actually envisioned these massive trains tearing across the continent at 200 kilometers per hour. This wasn't just a transit system. It was a megalomaniacal tool designed to firmly grip and economically dominate all of Eurasia.
Hitler's geographical delusion was just absolute. He aimed to entirely replace maritime shipping with this single rail network. Just track these routes for a second. From Berlin and Munich, stretching all the way out to Moscow and Istanbul to lock down continental conquest. But it didn't stop there. The network was planned to push deep into Iran and Iraq, specifically to capture rich oil reserves. There were even plans on the drawing board to push the tracks as far as Vladivostok on the Sea of Japan and down into British-occupied India. It was all about true global imperial reach.
So the crucial point is how this giant machine was actually intended to function logistically. It was essentially a terrifying three-step pipeline. Step 1, transport massive amounts of extracted raw materials from conquered territories straight back to the German Reich. Step 2, move those enslaved workers we talked about earlier to agricultural fields and factories to fuel the war machine. And Step 3, use the trains heading in the opposite direction to mass colonize half the world with German settlers. It was literally an engine of extraction on the way in and colonization on the way out.
And of course, because it was a prime instrument of conquest, it had to be violently defended. The Breitspurbahn possessed terrifying military capabilities, heavily armed to crush any local resistance it might roll past in occupied territories. We're talking enormous dedicated ammunition chambers, cabins filled with soldiers, and freight capacity so unimaginably huge that it was designed to transport heavy weaponry like tanks. According to the plans, the freight cars were so massive they could even carry entire ships. It functioned as much as a weapon of war as it did a mode of transport.
Ultimately, as we know, the train was never built. German rail experts knew the truth from the very start. Standard gauge tracks could have accomplished almost everything needed for a fraction of the ridiculous cost. But Nazi architect Albert Speer later revealed the real truth behind the madness. He said, the more monumental and oversized in scale, the more enthusiastic Hitler would be about a project. No one dared to seriously contradict the dictator about his favorite toy. It was a gigantic, embarrassing show of pure megalomania that squandered resources the regime desperately needed elsewhere.
Which brings us to a final, really provocative thought. If engineering truly reflects the mind of its creator, what does this impossible, never-built train tell us about the limitless bounds of human madness? The Breitspurbahn is a fascinating, chilling reminder of what happens when absolute power goes completely unchecked, obsessively pouring vast resources into a dark fantasy, while reality burns around it.